And I am going to turn it over to our moderator, Jen Lavalley, and she is going to introduce our panelists rather, and talk to you all about postgraduate legal fellowships.
Great, thanks, Christina, and hi, everyone. So glad you could join us today. I'm Jen Lavalley. I'm an assistant director with the Office of Public Interest and Community Service at Georgetown Law. I'm so excited to be moderating today. Before coming to Georgetown, I spent almost 13 years as a civil legal services attorney at the Legal Aid Society of DC, where I started as a fellow myself and then got to work with several amazing fellows in the years after. So all to say, fellowships as an entryway to public service is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I know we're all excited to learn from our panelists, so let's get right to it. I thought we'd start with some brief introductions from each of them, just so that folks have some context as we dig further into the nuts and bolts of the fellowship world. I know one of our panelists who we're expecting, who is a fellow right now, got stuck in a hearing and is running just a few minutes late. She's doing the good work. So I'm going to go a little bit out of order and invite Stacy, our representative from the employer side, to maybe kick us off. If you could just introduce yourself, Stacy, describe your work a little bit, and the role that a fellow plays at your organization.
Sure, thanks, Jen. So my name is Stacy Une. I'm a senior staff attorney at Advocates for Justice and Education. We are a nonprofit that provides legal services in Washington, DC to district residents or to folks who have children who are in DC schools. Primarily, I do direct services and client work. We have an open kind of hotline for parents to call if they're having educational issues. Our interns help support with intake, and then we provide services. We also do training and outreach programs as part of our organization. I applied to AJE as a fellow when I was at Georgetown, like a long time ago, so 9 years ago. And I didn't actually get the fellowship, but I got far along in the process. So I have some experience from that side. After that, I did end up working for AJE, and I worked for a clinic at UDC. I've applied for fellowships probably like 5 out of the last 7 years. And currently we have a fellow working with us. Her name is Catherine Bors. She comes from Harvard. And while we tried the Equal Justice Works Skadden Fellowship first, we ended up basically taking her application and being like, you know what, we can find other fellowships, other grantors to ask if they would fund the project. So we took the bulk of the work that you'll hear about is required for the fellowship application and applied, and Harvard Law School issued a 1-year fellowship. It's called the Skurnik Legal Fellowship. So that has allowed Catherine to join us. Some of the stuff she's been doing with us, she carries a caseload. That's primarily what she does. She's represented students in expulsion proceedings and in suspension cases, assisted parents in IEP meetings when their children with disabilities are not getting appropriate services in school. She has worked on litigation, supporting litigation in the matter with regards to special education cases, as well as observing me in a civil matter related to discipline in school and education and special education. Is that a sufficient answer to the question about the role a fellow plays?
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, Stacy.
Sure, and I'll just state, Jen, that we are looking and soliciting for project-based fellows to come to us if they have suggestions for next year.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next, maybe I'll turn it over to Jessica from Equal Justice Works, if you want to describe your work and some kind of high-level information about your fellowship program.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So my name is Jessica Reichman, and I am the Director of Fellowships at Equal Justice Works. I'd like to just take a few minutes and talk to you about our 2 postgraduate legal fellowships that we offer from Equal Justice Works. So we have the Design Your Own program, and we also have our cohort programs. So the Design Your Own program, I'll start by talking a little bit about that, which is probably the one that you are most familiar with if you've spent some time looking at the Equal Justice Works website. So in the Design Your Own program, fellows serve for 2 years a US or US territory-based nonprofit host organization. With the host organization, you create a 2-year innovative legal project, and that is designed to serve an unmet legal need. It can be in any issue area except for standard criminal defense or international work. And these fellowships are sponsored by private sector organizations, and that sponsorship is secured by Equal Justice Works. So you submit an application and then go through a selection process, and we try to match you up with a sponsor who will sponsor that project. We also have what we call our cohort program, which is a set of issue-based fellowships. And in that, you join a group of fellows who are working at different host organizations, usually within a couple of different states, and you're all working on the same issue. So there's a lot of ability to come together, share information and best practices, as well as receive extra training on those particular issues. And I mentioned that in part because we do have our housing justice program that's currently recruiting for attorneys in Maryland and South Carolina. So I wanted to mention that as well, in case anyone might be interested in a fellowship in the area of housing justice. And then to close, I just meant, we have those two programs combined, they have more than 200 fellows in the field right now, and we have 2,200 alumni. With more than 85% remaining in public service. We're very proud of that. As Stacey mentioned, it's a really great springboard into a career in public interest, and we will love to talk to you more about it over the course of the next hour. Thanks.
Thank you, Jessica. Kathleen, you could similarly introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about Skadden's fellowship program.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Kathleen Rubenstein. I'm the Executive Director of the Skadden Foundation and a former Skadden Fellow. The Skadden Fellowship Program is a lot like the Design Your Own Fellowship Program that Jessica just described, and many folks do put applications in for both. There's a lot of overlap, and so if it's your dream job, it's very straightforward to be planning on both of those for September deadlines. So Skadden Fellowship addresses the civil legal needs of people living in poverty in the US. For each of our programs, there's lots of nitty-gritty that we won't be able to discuss today, but both of our websites have a lot of information. We have FAQs on our website and a recorded info session. I'm doing another one next week. You can log into on the 20th. I'll tell you it's going to be at noon, not 11, like it says on our website. Sorry about that. And so there's an incredible variety of projects that folks submit. We're really agnostic as to geography and legal methodology. You're bringing your passion and skill set and really marrying that with an excellent host organization. So before you apply to us, you've secured that host organization and you've designed with them that project proposal that leverages their skills as your supervisor and a host, and also builds off your passion, right? So this is your dream job. So both of those are in place when you apply to us in September.
Thank you so much. So I think I will pose my first question on the panel to Stacey. Stacey, could you tell us, how is it that a public interest organization like yours makes the decision to explore fellowship support in the first place? What does that process look like from the employer's perspective?
Sure. Well, I guess I can talk about AJE in the beginning in 2013, because at that point I approached them as a law student and pitched a project. So AJE was not soliciting, as I am today, fellowship proposals or even ideas for fellowship proposals. I pretty much called cold, talked to the executive director, said I thought they had a great pro bono school discipline program, and that I wanted to talk to her about drafting a project-based fellowship on that. And that's how we got started. So what I will say is, for the ambitious folks in the audience, an organization might be perfectly willing to and need desperately a fellow, but not have the infrastructure to affirmatively solicit and find fellows to work with them. So just so you know, you absolutely can approach those smaller nonprofit organizations and see if they're willing to work with you. There's a range so that when you do have an infrastructure, so now I've been with AJE, more than 6 years since that time, and manage our law students process. So while I have folks contacting me in the community, that's how we ended up applying for fellowships before. It has taken that amount of time to build up to a point where today I can say we're soliciting fellowships. That's how much infrastructure and time is required from a small organization to build that. So in terms of why, well, you need to have a supervising attorney. So there has to be in the organization a supervising attorney for the fellow that's going to be able to supervise them the entire time. And, it has to support your mission. So the idea of the project-based fellowship or any fellowship is usually what you're already doing and plus then some. So that's also important for the supervisor, because that means the supervisor will then be supervising something that we haven't been doing, or at least more of what we want to do.
Thanks, Stacy. Let's see, the next question will be for Jessica. Jessica, I think you touched on this a little bit in your intro, but maybe you could flesh it out in a little more detail for us now. How does Equal Justice Works find the funding and solicit applications for each type of EJW fellowship?
Yeah, absolutely. So I will start again with the Design Your Own Fellowship. So we fund the Design Your Own Fellowship through sponsored donations, and our sponsors might be a law firm, a corporation, a foundation, or sometimes individual donors. Donors are engaged in the fellowship from the selection process through the 2 years of the fellowship. And that engagement can look a little bit different depending on who the sponsor is, but many of our sponsors actually provide a lot of volunteer and pro bono service to the projects as well. So it can be a really nice resource, not just to financially fund, but also to provide time and effort and expertise to your project if you're interested in that for your work. Some sponsors have geographic and or issue area preferences for the projects that they want to fund, but we always also have sponsors that are open to funding any impactful project regardless of the geographic or issue area. We do list the sponsor preferences that we're aware of on our website. So you can go find that on the application page if you have a question. If you have, for example, we know that we have someone who's specifically interested in homeless youth projects in Seattle, which is a very narrow set of interest, but that's what this particular foundation, that's the area that they work in. So if you want to go and check those kind of preferences out, if you have an idea, you can absolutely do that. And you can always email us and ask as well. The email address will be shared in the follow-on information as well. I'll throw it in the chat, but feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about that. So that's how that works with the sponsors on the Design Your Own side. So individual sponsors who are connected to a particular fellow. Our cohort programs are funded through larger government or foundation grants, and those sponsors are a little bit more hands off the day-to-day of the fellowship. They're not going to provide the pro bono support, but again, that's more of a network-based fellowship, so you have the support of your cohort. As far as applications, I will make a plug that they are open on our website. The Design Your Own is open until September 13th. I said the wrong date there. I gotta be careful on that. They're open till December 13th, and we welcome anyone to apply who qualifies, who is will be a graduate of law school, either with a JD or an LLM by September of 2023. So please do take a look. There's a lot of different eligibility, pieces, but if you had any questions, you can absolutely reach out to us again with any questions. We'd be happy to. And then I'll also make a plug. We have an upcoming webinar for applicants as well as host orgs and law school professionals. So please do attend that or send us an email if you have questions about the potential for an application.
Thank you, Jessica. And I see that Catherine is here. Welcome. Catherine, I know you were stuck at a hearing, working hard. We're so glad that you made it. I hope you've had to take chances just to take a breather. If I could ask you to just introduce yourself for a moment, tell us things like where you went to law school, tell us a little bit about your project, your host organization, whether you're in your first or second year of your fellowship, and what fellowship program you're a part of.
Of course. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy I was able to make it and happy to be here. My name is Catherine Ventura. I am an Immigrant Justice Corps Fellow at CARE Coalition. I went to American University, Washington College of Law in DC, and I am currently ending the second year of my fellowship. And pretty much my fellowship is tailored towards people interested in universal representation of people in immigration. Unlike the criminal system, we don't have a model in immigration to represent folks in detention, although they are sometimes or oftentimes subject to the same conditions. So this program and this fellowship was kind of built to connect recent graduates and fellows to organizations that were doing this type of work. So mostly my work focuses on representing immigrants in detention under like a universal representation model type of thing.
Thank you. And just as a follow-up question for you, Catherine, can you share how it was that you made the decision to apply for a fellowship in the first place?
So I think we've all been in the moment in our career when we feel like it's too soon. Like even though we were in law school for 3 years, it doesn't feel like it's enough to go out in the world and kind of like just be on your own. So I think that was one of my motivations, is kind of I wanted that transition period of I still want to learn more. And kind of getting out in the world, specifically because I think I realized I wanted to do immigration later in my career in law school, so I wasn't able to take as many classes that I would like. So the fellowship kind of gave me a little bit of both in terms of like, it was a very well organized and structured training program at the same time as I was going to be on the ground working. So that was one thing. The other thing, I think the connections that you make. So we all, the fellows are connected. We are in constant communication, and that network that we have, I wouldn't have had it if I would have just kind of jumped straight into the field. And that's one of the things that I'm most grateful for. So I think that's what led me to it, and that's what has kept me in it.
That's great. Thanks so much, Catherine. Kathleen, I'm going to ask you next. So as I understand, at least with most fellowships, you know, the process involves the student looking for their host organization first, and then comes the actual application together for a fellowship. And so a big part of that, right, is finding your host organization. From your perspective, from what you've seen, what do you think makes for a successful host organization?
It's a really great question. I will say, I think it is absolutely one of the most important, if not the most important decision you make in this process. And I encourage you all to vet your host organizations very carefully. I think I went through this process too. I think it can feel like, oh gosh, I really hope someone agrees to host me. But I would really encourage you to think about it a little bit differently, that this is the organization that you are bringing your future clients to, those clients that you went to law school to represent, right? And so you want the strongest host organization. You want them to have a superb track record of the type of lawyering that you want to do. And you want them to have a very strong track record of supervising and growing starting attorney skill sets. Like Catherine said, the Skadden Fellowship really thinks about the first couple of years of your legal career as a real apprenticeship. And so to the extent that you are committed to a particular methodology or particular issue or particular geography, right, you really want to find the organization that's lawyering in that way at the highest caliber, so that then you can grow into that kind of lawyer. I would say our programs do have also a few distinct considerations. So I'll just say for Skadden, the host organization requirements are pretty straightforward. It must be a 501c3. We cannot fund at a C4 or C6. We also can't fund at a law school, so it has to be a standalone nonprofit. And there must be 2 or more attorneys who are doing full-time civil legal advocacy. As Stacy said, the supervision is a really significant consideration for the host. And so we are looking at your supervision very, very carefully when we're evaluating your proposal. Ultimately, that's because your clients need you to be really well supervised. So when we think about the clients and the services you're going to be providing, thinking about your host's caliber and your supervisory strength is a very important part for us in evaluating your host organization. So how do you vet a host organization? Your professional contacts, right? Your clinical faculty may well know strong hosts. To the extent that they've had a Skadden Fellow before, by all means, be in touch with that person about their experience. If that person is not in your network, that's okay. You can let me know and I will share their email addresses with you, because you really do want to make sure that your experience, right, for these 2 years, but maybe more importantly, your experience as a part of your overall career and development is a really positive one.
Thank you, Kathleen. So staying on the topic of finding your host organization, this next question is for you, Catherine. Just to give us sort of a nuts and bolts of real life on the ground example of what this looked like for you. What was the process like finding and working with your host organization? Did you have a relationship with them before? How did you approach that?
So I approached it similarly to how Kathleen was describing it. I think to me it was very important to find an organization that aligned with my views, with the work that I wanted to do. And that's going to be as radical as me as a lawyer in the work that I wanted to do. And so that was at the upfront of like my idea of an organization. At the fellowship that I was, we were given a list of a lot of organizations, and we were lucky enough that we had like all the benefits listed, the pay that you were going to get, location, all of the details. So those were also part of my decision, kind of like, did I want to move from DC? Did I want to stay in the area? Other considerations. But I think the most important thing was talking to people in the field and talking to my professor and mentors, because they were able to tell me what was their take of the organization. They knew the work of the organizations, and they were going to give me a more informed idea of not only the work that the organization was doing, but how was the organization as an employer, because that's something that to me was super important. I wanted to learn, and I needed an organization that was committed to my learning. And I think talking to professors was absolutely key in making that decision.
Thanks, Catherine. Jessica, Stacy, anything that you want to add from the EJW or employer side about this question of sort of the pairing of a prospective fellow with the organization before you actually start the process of working on the application itself in earnest?
I think for me, I would approach a potential fellow similar to how I approach an interview for a law student who's going to be interning with us. With the understanding, of course, that in my organization, I am the primary supervisor for our fellow. So I would, of course, be looking for someone that I can work well with. And I think in particular for these kind of projects, you are looking for that ambition. So it's like the pairing of the supervisor who's been doing the work for a long time and the law student who's coming in to support that work, because most of us just need more money in the nonprofit sphere to hire more attorneys, but support that base work and then take it to the next level. So you have to have a meeting of the minds, again, between the supervisor and whoever is selected as the fellow about what you're trying to accomplish. I will tell you that I accomplished my project. It just wasn't funded and it just wasn't in the 2-year timeline that I'd initially outlined. But it shows that like I was committed, as well as my host organization being committed to actually just implementing the project.
And I would add, I think a lot of what Kathleen said is very right, you know, in terms of reaching out to others to find out past experiences or you know, information about the host organization. At Equal Justice Works website, there's a Meet Our Fellows section where you can search by host org. So you can see if somebody has worked there previously, and you can reach out to that alum or contact us if you can't find contact information for that person. So we're absolutely happy to do that. And then I just want to echo, you know, this for us, the host organization, you know, they're your employer for the next 2 years. So not only make sure that they're a good fit for you in terms of, you know, culture and mission, but also, you know, have the conversations about benefits and work expectations. Like, are you supposed to be remote? Are you supposed to be in the office? Like, what is, I think it's both a fellowship, but it's also, you know, your job. So treat it as both.
Thank you all so much. So here's a timing question, I think, for any of our panelists. We're now in mid-July. If someone is interested in applying for a fall 2023 fellowship, what should they be doing now or in the next few weeks? And maybe Kathleen from Skadden, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so if you already have a host commitment, that's wonderful. If you don't, That is top order of business. So Stacy made a really good point that hosts go about this process differently. Some are super well organized and well structured, and there's a formal application process where you write up a little bit about what you're interested in or submit your resume. Some of those windows have already closed. Some of those are open now. You could find them on Idealist or PSGD or on your law school websites. Again, posted just like a formal job. There are a lot of wonderful organizations that will not go through any of our processes any year unless you reach out. And they go through the process because they identify that with you, there's this really great overlap. And so that means cold calling, emailing is also part of this process. You'll need a spreadsheet. If you're not there yet, you want to be doing that outreach immediately. The actual writing of the application is not the most time-consuming part. I mean, you definitely want to be spending time throughout August, not just like at the end of August on that. But it's really the thinking that is reflected in that writing that takes time. And that's why you really want to be moving as quickly as possible to be at the stage very soon where you have a host and you have a meeting of the minds around the broad concept. And then every additional week that you have to deepen your insight, to identify more about the ecosystem of services that are available and deepen your knowledge of the law and the methodologies that you'll be using will make you a more insightful and more successful applicant.
Thanks. Do any of our other panelists want to weigh in on sort of timing, what things look like, what should be happening in July and as we move into August?
I think Kathleen really did a great job. The thing I would just touch base on as well is that that's absolutely where you should be in the next few weeks. I would also try to leave, to the extent possible, room for perhaps conversations with other community organizations in case you need to figure out where your project fits in, you know, especially for Equal Justice Works. We are looking for projects that are for an unmet legal need, right? So if it's not being met by your host organization, it's good to know what others are doing just to make sure that you're fitting in that requirement. And then one other recommendation we have is that to the extent possible, you have a review panel. So if you've got professors that work in your area of your issue area or otherwise. So now would be a good time to start pulling in just a few trusted folks who maybe your career counselor at your law school or otherwise, who can help review your application and your project ideas. But it's a great idea to reach out to them soon because you want to make sure that they know it's coming and that they have time to be thoughtful in their review and in the information that they give you.
Great, thanks. Anyone else want to chime in on timing? The only thing that I can think of to add just from my own personal experience in legal services before coming to Georgetown was that I think it was not unheard of for organizations to sometimes be on the later end of being ready to post and solicit candidates and to hear from candidates who had proposals or wanted to work with the organization on a project. And so while certainly the sooner the better on all of these, because there's a lot of work that goes into it, I wouldn't lose hope if you haven't started yet, and there might even be organizations that are posting towards, you know, mid to end of summer, still trying to like real quick find someone to go in together on a really interesting project. Let's see. So another question for all four, anyone who wants to chime in. What does the actual application look like? And I know that this depends on which fellowship you're applying for, but maybe you can start with Kathleen and then go on to Jessica. And then if anyone else wants to chime in, we can go for it.
Sure. So ours is pretty short. Like EJW, it's already on our website now. It is brief biographical information in a PDF form, and then 4 very brief essay questions. They're 400 words each. The first describes your project. You can use bullet points, get the important information down. And then the other 3 are a little bit more about your approach to lawyering and your trajectory up to this point, and then your future career, because one of our goals is to launch public interest careers. And then you submit a package of materials. For us, one really important ingredient is the host commitment letter. The host is not word limited, so they are able to provide us a little additional context. And there's, again, bullet points for our hosts on our website as well about what we're looking for in those materials. You're also providing us your resume. For us, it can be more than 1 page, just show us all your relevant experience. You're also submitting 2 letters of recommendation. For us, one is academic and one is supervisory. And then you're also submitting your transcript. I know other folks don't require a transcript. I will say when we are looking at the transcript, we are looking for more than just your raw GPA. I'm looking really carefully about your preparation to do the work that you've outlined in terms of your substantive selection courses and overall your law school trajectory. And in addition to those, there are 2 brief certification forms. One from you, everything in there is true. Everything, you'll devote your time to your fellowship if selected. And then one is for your host organization to sign. This is another thing to make sure that you're flagging early each component. Make sure that the host is also reviewing that, because it's probably not your supervising attorney, right? That's probably someone in HR or finance. That document is also where your host will be telling you your starting salary. It's really important for you to have that information and also letting you know about benefits.
Great, thank you. So our application is also entirely online. It is, as Christina put in the chat, it's a bit longer. So if you're doing both, maybe it's helpful, you can put them in order, review and see which parts might be applicable to both. So we have 3 sections in our application, and the part 1 talks about the project. It's a brief description and a statement of need of the project, the goals and the timeline primarily. So you're really trying to dive into what are the specifics of what you're planning or proposing to do. There's also a section there to talk about ways the sponsor might be involved or what other elements of community collaboration. So that all fits into part 1. The second part focuses in on you, the candidate. So that includes a personal statement. So why do you care about this particular project? And that's where you can really talk about your personal connection to the issue or the community. And I would note that you don't have to be a member of the community to apply. You just have to explain to us why you care. Why did you come up with this project idea? Why does it mean something to you? But that's a really meaningful part of the application for us. And I will say, I know a few folks who read that part first. So pay attention to just making sure you explain why you care about this. Then we also do ask for the resume, 3 references and 2 letters of recommendation to complete the section on the candidate. We don't require GPA or transcripts, so a little bit different from Skadden. So if you do include it, we don't on your resume. We don't ask for transcripts, and if you do include it on your resume, we don't look at it. And then finally, the last section is for your host organization, and they describe how the project connects to their mission. What experience you have with the host organization. Again, maybe you've been an intern or an extern there, or maybe you contacted them over the summer and they're like, wow, what a great idea. We want to be a partner with this candidate. They talk a little bit about what their history is with Equal Justice Works and what pro bono experience. And then finally, they talk a bit about the supervisors and what their experience is. As Kathleen said, the supervision is such an important part of project success. So that's a really important thing. So the host organization does the 3rd part. I know I just described what sounds like a lot, but keep in mind, the whole thing comes out minus the letters of recommendation and resume comes out to about maybe 7 to 8 pages with lots of big breaks of formatting in there. So it's I don't want anyone to feel intimidated by the different sections. They're each, a couple of paragraphs. But that's what our application looks like. And I would just recommend too, those letters of recommendation, as Kathleen had mentioned as well, it's a good idea to start thinking about who you're going to ask and giving them some time. As someone who's written a lot of letters of recommendation, a good one takes a while. So give your recommenders time to do a good job.
Thank you both. Catherine, since you're on a different fellowship other than Skadden and Equal Justice Works, your Immigrant Justice Corps, if you remember, did that application process look similar to what Kathleen and Jessica have described, or any differences that you want to flag?
I just came to realize that it's completely different. Pretty much our project was built, which was universal representation was the idea. And this was brought to us by the fellow organization. So the fellowship organizing the placing the fellows in the host organizations. So we didn't have to build our own project. Pretty much they wanted to support this bigger idea of nationwide kind of access to free legal representation in the context of immigration. So in that regard was way much easier than everything, a little bit less on the creative side, but similarly in the way that I think the application process focuses a lot in your lawyering kind of like ideals and why do you want to do this work and why are you so passionate, and to ensure that you are going to uphold kind of like the values of not only the host organization, but also kind of the fellowship as a whole. And the idea of universal representation, I think, was central in the application process. In terms of the application, it wasn't super different from a regular job. So cover letter, resume, and then I think some specific essay-like questions. I think there were 2 or 3 500-word questions, and they were all kind of in the context of like what type of work you're eager to do, why are you so passionate about this, all around kind of like really matching your values and the type of lawyer you wanted to be with the work you wanted to do. So for us, we first applied to the fellowship organization, and then you did a ranking process. So then after you were kind of like over the first round of interview, you went through the screening process to your application, then the first round of interview with the organization, and then the fellowship organization picked however many fellows and then gave us a list of all the organizations they could place us around the US. And then based on, you know, different considerations, you rank them. You could rank them all, you could rank a few, etc. And then the organization would do the same thing with the fellows. And then if there was a match, the host organization would interview you separately. And then they could extend you an offer, and then you could accept or decline. So in that way, it was a little bit more different. It's a little bit more of a matching process.
Thanks. That's such a great reminder of just like how much variation in the structure of fellowships there can be. Including that, I think sometimes I get the impression that students feel like they need to have a really well-formed, designed from scratch idea to pitch, when in fact there are a lot of fellowships where the employer already has a very clear idea of what they want and need and want to work on it with the student. And so it's okay if, you know, you don't have your own start from scratch innovative thing, but are just extremely passionate about doing something that the organization has already been thinking about or is looking for someone to work on with. Okay, so our next question, this is again open for all 4. What happens after you submit the application? What does that process look like? Anybody feel like taking that one?
I'll jump in. Kathleen's gone first a lot recently. give her a moment. So after our applications are submitted on September 13th, but hopefully before September 13th, but that's your deadline. We take about the next month and we have our alumni, who are subject matter experts on the subject of the application, review it. So they review at least 2 and ideally 3 alumni review every application. And they help score the projects, help us understand the quality of the idea and the strategy and what impact they think that project would have. Beginning in late November or December, we work with sponsors to schedule interviews with candidates. So the interviews go from between December to April, and it's a rolling basis. So as folks are interviewed, the fellowships are awarded, and we give folks that news. Some folks do go through multiple rounds of interviews. We try to get people in front of as many sponsors as are a match. So that can happen a few times. If for some reason you don't get the first fellowship after your first interview, don't lose hope. There are other opportunities for that. So we do that through, again, April, and then we close the class and make a big announcement in May of everyone who's joined. The fellows typically will then take the bar exam in July and start in September of 2023, which so why it's away at this point, but yeah, that's our timeline. That's what happens after.
Yes, I'll chime in. Really similar starting timeline. If you are a Rising 3L and you're going to be applying this fall to SCADM, you'll be applying by Friday, September 9th. You can also apply after law school for SCADM only from a judicial clerkship or an LLM program. So the bulk of folks are applying after 12 summer. So you apply on September 9th. what happens next is I read a lot. We receive on average about 200 applications a year, so a smaller program than EJW. And we're not able to interview everyone. So I review all of the applications and then share a group of applicants with the advisory committee. So these are partners in all of Skadden's offices who are really involved with the foundation and also involved with legal services, board of service, and pro bono as well. And then we identify about 100 applicants to interview. Our interviews happen immediately after that cut. So the last couple days in September and the first 2 weeks of October, we'll let you know if you receive an interview or if we're not able to proceed right away. And then as soon as those interviews conclude in mid-October, we will let everyone who got an interview know if they're proceeding as a finalist or if they're not. So again, you'll know in mid-October. And then the final step in our process is we have an independent board of selection trustees. It's made up of senior folks at the firm and a bunch of former Skadden fellows and really amazing folks. They come to New York and they select our final class of 28 fellows. It'll be on November 10th. We'll let everyone know the next day. And same thing, you take the bar in the summer for the most part, starting fall.
Thank you both. Catherine, so now that you're a fellow, you've been a fellow for almost two years now, so congratulations. Can you tell us a little bit about what your work has looked like, and in particular, how, if at all, your work looks different from that of a staff attorney at your organization?
Of course. So I think in a lot of ways, my work has been pretty much the same as any other staff attorney. I started it around September, so we have a similar timeline than the other fellowships. And then once I started, there was kind of like a 1 or 2 month onboarding process of a lot of training. Both the host organization gave us a lot of training, and the IJC gave us a lot of training, which is different from a regular staff attorney, which would probably have 1 or 2 weeks of training. We had a little bit more substantive training there. And then after that training, we got our first case. And then the prep started for the first case, and I've been pretty much doing direct representation. And the way that's different is, and this is going to get a little bit into the nitty gritty, but our organization, we get fundings from different areas. And my organization, I mean the host organization, we get funding from very different areas. So there's restrictions on who you can represent and which person on what team can represent what people. I didn't have any of those restrictions because I was a fellow. So my funding was coming from a separate grant. And because the idea was this universal representation project, I could represent whoever I wanted. And that was amazing for my professional development, because if I wanted to do an appeal, I could do an appeal. If I wanted to do a habeas, I could do a habeas. If I wanted to do the regular direct representation immigration court, I could do that too. But I had so much more freedom of choosing my clients, the relief that they were seeking, and less restrictions in projects. Like I was also involved in advocacy projects, for example, in pushing bills and other grant projects as well. So I had a lot of flexibility because of my fellowship that a regular staff attorney didn't. And that was really great.
Thanks. And Jessica and Kathleen, would you say that fellows in your programs have similar experiences to what Catherine has described? So, you know, a lot that is a total overlap with what the work of a staff attorney might look like, but maybe more flexibility, less restriction.
I'll jump in. So our fellowships are specifically not to the staff attorney position. So while the work might look the same in terms of being, you know, direct representation or something of this sort, it is supposed to be in the service of your fellowship project. So, for example, if you are proposing to work at an organization that does representation for immigrants, but you're going to serve the Portuguese-speaking community, just as an example, and that currently they only serve the Finnish-speaking community. We would expect that the vast majority of your work is with that community. Not saying that you couldn't step in to help a colleague or, you know, things like that, but the work is intended to be on that specific project and goals, and that's what you report on during our reporting periods.
Yeah, I would just chime in. This is one of the really important considerations when you're selecting your host. You want to make sure that your host is as all in on the project as you are, because when you get there and you need to be supervised and the day-in, day day out work of running a nonprofit is very intense and client need is very significant. You want to make sure that the clients that you've identified and that the work that you two have outlined together is going to be a priority, not just for you, but also for your host. So we also expect you to be completing your fellowship process and have some, respectful flexibility in what some of your time looks like as a member of the organization. But yeah, you're doing something that you guys have outlined together, and that may look a little bit different or a fair bit different than the person sitting next to you.
Thank you. Stacy, this next question is for you, and it has to do with how organizations work to transition fellows to staff members when possible. Can you tell us a little bit about that from your perspective at AJE?
Sure. We're not a large organization, so I can only speak from our perspective, but it is our desire that any fellow who works with us, who wants to stay, could stay, with the idea that we've already done the training. They're already up and running and on the ground representing clients. So, that's work. What that looks like from my side is me talking to our executive director and making sure that she's looking at all opportunities in conjunction with the fellow to see whether we can support an addition to our staff. But like I said, that's coming from a small organization. Other than that, I've already had conversations with my fellow about knowing that she needs to apply for other positions and how I'm going to support her in doing so. That's what I can share.
Thank you. And then this is kind of our last structured question before we move on and take a look at what's been in the Q&A, but just a catch-all for all of our panelists. What advice do you have for law students in the audience? What things have we not touched on that you really want law students to know who are thinking about this or in the middle of or beginning of starting this process?
I will share that I would recommend if you are a 1L, 2L, to be considering where you're spending your second or first year internship, with the understanding that all that we've been talking about of what you have to do, it's a lot of work to complete the application. It's a very competitive process with great reward, but still very competitive, that you have a relationship and that you know what the organization does. That could also look like a semester externship, which my organization always welcomes. We actually do education. So when law students are the most available is when we are the least busy in the summer. And when we need the most help is when sometimes it can be really difficult to find law students who can give that support. So I would encourage you to consider it early on about how you're cultivating a relationship with not just a host, but also potentially a supervising attorney. I know for me, Rashonda, who's our executive director now, was my supervising attorney, and we worked hand in hand on the project application together. So that was a brand new relationship, but involved in working on a huge work product. So consider that you might want to start thinking about that early. And then I would just also urge, like I said before, do think about those great nonprofits that are doing wonderful things, but are not posting on PSJD. We do care about you. We do want your application. We just might not have the energy and the staffing to come and find you. So know that you can look for us and potentially find something there. And then also keep in mind that even if you go through SCADN, even if you go through Equal Justice Works, the bulk of the work you are doing, you're basically writing a grant application. That's work that my nonprofit has to do all the time. So consider what you've already built and what you're building as a way of being like, I'm not going to waste my time. Like, I'm going to focus my time and build something about my biography, about the host, about a project that I can use and push to other funders because you can be successful in doing so.
That's all excellent advice. I'll just chime in. We are, and I think I said this before, right? Like, we're thinking about the clients when we're evaluating your application. And so if you're thinking about the clients front and center when you're designing your project proposal, that's going to yield the most insightful proposal. So I think there's plenty of advice out there that fundamentally is not about the clients, and I think you can ignore all of that. It's relatively strategy proof. If you are in fact putting the elements of the project together that are going to best serve this client need, if you find yourself the host organization that is the best place to bring those clients to, then the project you design is going to be the most impactful one. You want to come to us as the expert, right? I am a public interest generalist. You are not. You're going to be an expert in one thing. And so you're going to develop that insight. You're going to continuously develop that insight, but even over the time between now and September. So at Skadden, that probably looks like talking to other Skadden fellows. You can see what all of us have done on our website. And also you are welcome to talk to me. I talk to a bajillion applicants every summer. Shoot me a few windows that you'd be available to talk, and I'll let you know if I have any questions or concerns about what you outlined. That way you can prepare to address those in your written materials. But we really want to make sure that you have all the information to put your best foot forward on your own application. So spend a lot of time on our website. I think we've tried to answer everything you'll need there. And to the extent anything isn't clear, that's also something we'd really want to talk to you.
All right, I will jump in. Actually, you guys have just gotten some really great advice. So I would just say, I think that the thing that we often find comes through very strongly in the Equal Justice Works application. I said this already a little bit, but it really is your connection and passion for the work. And we see these fellowships as a way to launch public interest leaders. And that is what we hope, that both your project is going to meet the needs of a community, but also that you are really interested in you, and are you interested in public interest for the long haul? So really, I think to the extent that you can demonstrate that passion, it really does matter. So don't leave that section for last. Maybe even do it first. But that's the part where you want to be fresh and just really help us understand who you are and why you care about this. So I would just emphasize that for us. But otherwise, you guys have gotten great advice. So what they said as well.
Great. Catherine, anything you want to add, advice for people who are thinking about applying?
I think similarly, I just want to reiterate everything that everyone's saying. Don't shy away from directly applying to host organizations that caught your attention, even if they're not part of the particular fellowship you're applying at that moment. I think keeping your professional development at the forefront of your fellowship before and during too, because like Stacy was saying, you have to also build your resume to your next step if you have another step. And that's why it's also important picking a right host organization that will also have that as a priority. And then finally, also like the value and the interest in the work. I think public interest suffers a lot from retention. We burn out really quickly, and most nonprofit organizations are going to be struggling with keeping attorneys for the long run. So if we can see right from the bat that you're a person that are committed to this work, that's definitely going to stand out, because that's exactly what we need in the field as a whole.
Great, thank you all. I am opening up the Q&A now because we've got a few minutes to take some questions for people in the audience. So the first question I'm seeing is, what advice do you have for ascertaining salaries that are not posted with the job description, or that are only described as competitive, commensurate with experience? Anyone have thoughts on that?
For this one, recognizing who's on the call, I will say that I believe Skadden and Equal Justice Works, as kind of the main primary fellowship funders, do set like a base salary expectation for those of us in legal services when we're entering. It has increased some since I've started, but I think that coupled with like regular websites like Glassdoor and all of that to kind of get an idea of what folks are making in the legal field. I also think that like our organization, we're moving to be more transparent. So while we don't pay our law clerks, unfortunately, we don't have that funding. With regards to all of our staff that we're hiring, we're going to have salaries or ranges listed on all of our documents. So considering that that's a strategic move on our part to be more transparent and to assist in the process. So that being said, I don't think it's that out of the question to just ask what is standard, with the understanding that that's where we're going, especially public interest.
Can I piggyback on that answer a little bit? So this is, I think that that's a really great answer. There is a shift toward pay transparency overall, which I think is incredibly positive. This is such a golden opportunity. I do just want to mention, my name is Sam Halpert. I'm the Director of Public Service Initiatives for NALP. I'm the least important person on this panel. I'll be talking briefly about our approach to fellowships in a moment, but we conduct a survey of public service attorney salaries every few years. The most recent edition was our 2022 edition. When the survey has information about average salaries for a particular area of law in a particular part of the country that is relevant to a job notice on the site, we try to give you that information right here in the sidebar. So this is a legal aid position in East St. Louis. The compensation is 60,000-ish with a license, and we can sort of show you how that compares to median salaries in the Midwestern region. This is just a sample of a broader range of information that's contained in the full report, which is also available on psjd.org. This link here will take you to it. There are a variety of tools for exploring this data. One of my favorites lets you plot salaries against the living wage line for a particular part of the country, as measured by the Economic Policy Institute. So I do just want to mention this tool. The other thing that I would say, if you're trying to do some research on your own before asking an organization point blank, is it's worth looking at the IRS's tax exempt organization tool. Most organizations that you're applying to, they may be nonprofits. You can pull their Form 990 and find out how their top paid employees are compensated. And so if you're talking with an organization and you're aware of what the top compensated people are making, you can compare that against your own salary and get some sense of whether it's an organization that is very resource strapped and everybody is sort of pulling together, or whether there are sort of broader disparities at play. And the last thing that I would say is worth doing is you can look around for collective bargaining agreements for similar organizations, even if the organization you're applying to doesn't have one, doing similar work in a similar part of the country. Without naming names, I just did that Google search right now, and you can pull salary schedules out of these CBAs to give you some sense of what unionized employers that already have really good transparency are providing to employees.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sam. I'm so glad you jumped in with that because it's so on point, and those are great resources. Do any of the other panelists have anything they want to jump in on the salary question?
Can I just add, I completely agree with Stacy. It's an appropriate question to ask. And Jessica gave you a lot of other appropriate questions to ask, right? You need to know about generally about the terms of your work. One thing that you'll see when you look at collective bargaining agreements is also a lot of information about benefits. And I would say that those can overall have a really significant impact on your sort of take home salary, how much of your health insurance you're paying, whether or not they have loan repayment assistance, things like that, whether or not they're paying for your transit. So just be mindful that there's salary is an incredibly important question. You may want to also be asking, this is before you're licensed, and if there's a standard bump at the end of the first year, those are quite common in our sector, but also be thinking about the benefits.
Yeah, I think everyone's done a great job, and thank you, Sam. I actually I knew some of those resources, but not all. So I really appreciate that as a way to be able to funnel folks towards. So I would say just make sure you have those conversations and you're very, very clear with it. But if you have any questions too, you can always also try your network of alums. Sometimes people with the transparency movement, I find, are actually really willing to share what they make, as mentioned. And so I think that there's no problem with calling and asking. Like I said, you've got a former fellow or a current fellow at the host org, and that would be my other suggestion to consider.
Great, thank you, everyone. So another question that we have is about recommendation letters. For recommendation letters, do you have any general advice on who students should try to get the letters from and what the recommenders should focus on in the letters? Anyone want to take that one?
I'm happy to jump in. For Equal Justice Works, the letters should be ideally from current or former employers, professors, or folks that know you professionally or academically and can ideally discuss your relevant skills and or past involvement in public service work. So I would say what they should focus on is obviously what they know about you. So, you know, for example, your academic letter might really be focused in on some of those skills, but also touching on, as I keep bringing this up, but you know, your passion and commitment to the issue, I think is really relevant. So to the extent you can pick your recommenders to highlight maybe 2 different experiences and or 2 different, you know, things that you'd really like us to know about you. We spend a lot of time with these letters. They're very dense and often so glowing, but it's really helpful to just be able to get a picture of someone and their commitment to the work. So just, I would think about it a little strategically, if you could, about maybe having different aspects highlighted a little differently in the letters, just to make sure that you're making the most of that opportunity. And the last thing I'll say is, you know, I mentioned our application often comes out with kind of big formatting blocks, maybe 7 to 8 pages. But the letters of recommendation are 4 pages total. Like it's 2 pages each for 2 recommenders. So it's a lot of extra information that you can get in front of the reviewers.
Jessica also gave you a really important piece of advice, which is to be respectful of their time and ask early. And another thing I would say, just like for us, it matters a lot. A letter of recommendation reads a lot better if the person knows you really well. So don't look at your transcript and think, well, like I did best in this class, so that's the person I have to ask. Like, we're going to find out that you did well in that class. In our case, we're going to see your transcript. But you really want somebody who can actually really speak to your qualifications and just be really mindful with each of our programs that you're reading those instructions very, very carefully before you're imposing on other people's time. So you're reading our host certification before you're talking to a host about salary, right? You're reading exactly who we need your recommenders from, so you don't ask the wrong person or send us one that doesn't meet the buckets that we require.
Great, thank you both. I think we've got one more question in the Q&A, which I think is perfect for the amount of time that we've got left. Does a postgraduate federal judicial clerkship help at all with these public interest fellowships? And I can imagine that could be coming from the perspective of someone who is finishing up a clerkship and wondering if they're a strong candidate, or perhaps someone who's trying to figure out what to prioritize in terms of a post-grad opportunity.
I'll just say it's July, so you've probably already heard if you're clerking for next year. When folks apply to us off a clerkship, they come to us a year later, which means a whole year or more of seminars and clinics and specialized classes. So the degree of sophistication is a little higher. And in our case, also like your 3L transcript tends to look pretty great. So that's helpful as well. I don't think it's something to get hung up on. If you're coming off a clerkship, that's great. If you're not, that's totally fine. We have anecdotally seen the clerkship market tick backwards. So we see a lot of former fellows clerking after their fellowship. That's another fine opportunity too as well. So I would say whatever works for you is fine. If you feel like that's going to make you a better public interest lawyer, right? If you're a 1L right now, or rising 2L, and you think you're going to learn really useful skills there, I think you're right. I clerked and I found it very helpful. I wouldn't say you need to do it though in order to launch a career in our sector at all. So just be thinking about your clients and your career, and if it works for you, that's fine.
I would echo that. If you think it will make you a stronger lawyer for the community you're looking to serve, then absolutely, it's great. But it's not something that fits for all interest projects, issue areas, things like that. So I think to the extent that we see it, it's not something that necessarily, it's not like ranked or rated or given points separately. It's just part of the overall package. Why did you clerk? What did it like how does it demonstrate your commitment to public interest and or this community? And if you're able to tell that narrative, then that's great. Of course, it does not hurt you either. So yeah, I think it just depends on where you think it fits into your path.
I think I have a very specific to immigration and kind of like different answer, but similar in a way that I have seen a trend more of people doing it after the fellowship. I know some fellows that have now shifted into a clerkship. In immigration specifically, I think if you do a clerkship in the immigration court, that's going to be highlighted in your interview 1000%. Just because we want to know your intentions and your commitment, it's a little bit more of an adversarial area for us, which, you know, I'm not saying that that would absolutely disqualify you, not at all. I think you learn very valuable experience if you've clerked for an immigration judge and then you go work for representing people in immigration. I think that's super valuable, but again, it comes down to why are you doing it, why are you learning from it, and how do you think you're going to use those skills to the current position. So just if you do it in immigration, just be ready to answer questions that are tailored to that, and they're able to address why you think and why you did the shift and why you think these skills are useful for the role that you're seeking now.
Great, thank you so much. It's, I think, the perfect time for us to wrap up this panel and this portion of the presentation. I just want to give a huge thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for our participants and all these great questions. And I'm going to turn it over now to Sam Halpert from NALP.
Thanks very much, Jen. You heard a little bit from me earlier when I weighed in on the salary question, but just to sort of introduce myself a little bit more calmly. I get excited about that kind of stuff. My name is Sam Halpert. I'm the Director of Public Service Initiatives at the National Association for Law Placement. It's a trade association composed of, on the one hand, career services officers at law schools, and on the other, diversity, career professional development and hiring personnel at various employers. I work specifically on employment issues related to civil society and government jobs. And I am here today to talk just a little bit about how we approach fellowships. NALP's vehicle for public service work is a website called psjd.org. Hopefully, if you're on the call, you've heard of it. If not, you should definitely go and visit it now. Almost everyone is eligible for free access through their law schools. We're financed by law school subscriptions. If you try to sign up for an account and you find out that you are not eligible, there are options for you as well to explore. PSJD looks like this. I had it on the screen earlier. Are people seeing the website now? Am I switching back and forth properly between this and the PowerPoint? Excellent. Okay. PSJD is a number of things. It is a job database. It has an employer directory where we have brief profiles of employers that have posted any job at all with us over the last several years, which hopefully is how we try to catch somewhere on the system smaller employers that may not have the bandwidth or the resources to advertise for fellowships. You may still be able to surface them by doing research on our site if they've had any engagement at all with us over the last several years. And we have a resource center where you can explore materials related to a variety of topics, including postgraduate fellowships. When you go on PSJD and you are searching for jobs, you have the ability to filter based, among other things, on what type of job it is. And there's a section for postgraduate fellowships, and we have these three options in this area. I just want to talk a little bit about what these options mean so that you get a sense of how you can use them. For our purposes on PSJD, when we say that a job is a postgraduate fellowship, what we mean is that it's a position that is term limited, usually a 1 year or a 2 year term period. Jobs that are indefinite, we would not treat as postgraduate fellowships. We mean that these jobs are for entry-level candidates that are straight out of law school or 1 or 2 years out of law school. there are some programs that conceive of fellowships that are for, people at a much later stage in their career, but this is what we mean when we talk about it. That, built into the experience is this opportunity for the entry-level candidate to learn on the job or grow. That's the sort of supervision and training piece that people have been talking about a lot here. And finally, we think of these as positions that are likely to recur. That's more important for us in the way we approach our work at PSJD than it is for you, but it's still relevant and worth bringing up for reasons that I think will become clear in a moment. So within those, you saw 3 different categories on our site. The first one is project-based fellowships. Most of what we've been talking about tonight, we would categorize as project-based fellowships. These are the Skadden's, EJW. There are several other organizations with large project-based fellowships programs. Soros is one, Echoing Green. We have a resource where we do a comparison of them. But I believe it was Stacy was talking about how these large national programs get the most attention, but there are more niche sources of funding out there. This is one that I often use as an example. The Connecticut Bar Foundation often funds a project-based fellowship that's specific to legal aid in Connecticut. So depending on what you're trying to do, it's worth looking around to see if there are smaller funders with much more targeted interests that you may be eligible to work with. The key thing from our perspective, the reason why we set these aside is because they have this application process that's similar to grant writing. It's this 2-step process where first you convince an organization to work with you, and then the 2 of you work together to try to convince a funder to support the joint effort that you're going to make. So we think about things in terms of hiring and career development. The hiring process for these is substantially different, and so we categorize them differently. Our second category are what we call organizational fellowships. This is similar to the application process for hiring a staff attorney. The organization typically has its own source of funding, and they are looking to hire directly someone into a job that we would still think of as a fellowship, that it's term limited, it has a lot of supervision, it's an entry-level position, and it will be recurring. Some organizations have their fellows dedicated to a particular project or issue, but the key thing here is that it's an organization that's providing the funding and not a third party. And so this is an example of one where the Homeless Advocacy Project in San Francisco has a 1-year position where they fund a fellow to come in and work specifically on eviction defense with them. The final category of fellowships on the site are clinical or academic fellowships. These are substantially different from the kinds that we've been discussing tonight. It's more similar to applying to be a clinic staff or a research position at a law school. It's still an entry ramp into the legal profession, but rather than helping you enter the profession as a legal aid attorney or policy counsel, something like that, it's to offer graduates an opportunity to begin getting into work in a clinical setting or an academic setting. And there's an example of that here as well that I won't focus on. Organizations that are nonprofits or government organizations that are eligible to advertise on PSJD, as long as they say that they either require or prefer candidates with formal legal training, can advertise whatever kind of position they want. So you will occasionally see fellowships on PSJD that say advanced degree in law, public health, economics, or another relevant discipline, required. We don't go out and proactively look for these kinds of non-legal fellowships, though. We have a big internal effort every year to reach out to organizations that have had fellowships with us in the past see if they're advertising again, update their resources on PSJD to provide as comprehensive an account as we can. We don't do that for non-legal fellowships, and so it's worth calling that out. This is one resource that I know of, profellow.com, that focuses on fellowships very broadly and doesn't limit itself to the legal sphere. So that's how we think about them. How can you use the system? You can start with a job database, and you can see over here postgraduate fellowships in the 3 categories we've been discussing. You'll find some notices where employers that are looking for fellows list a position, or list their interest in finding someone to partner with on an application to a project-based fellowship. Organizations like EJW and Skadden that have funding that they're offering to organizations with fellowships to propose, or with projects to propose, excuse me, will also place notices in the job database. Importantly, it's possible to search outdated opportunities here on the site. So this symbol is meant to be like a historical marker. On this date in 1812, the following happened. And we use that so that people that are looking for jobs that are currently available now that you can apply for can just turn these off. But we leave them up for a number of years because they can be helpful for people that are trying to learn about what organizations have worked with fellows in the past, or what organizations have typically hired fellows on a recurring basis, and maybe they just haven't gotten their latest notice up yet. This is one way to view those in the job database, but we have an entirely separate screen, this fellowship calendar feature that will appear if you start to search for fellowships, specifically filter for fellowships in our jobs database, that shows you these same results in a calendar format, where you can either list them based on the date when they were initially placed on our site, or the date when they initially had their application deadline. This calendar ignores the year in which something occurred. So for example, an elder justice program advertised for the Equal Justice Works Fellow on June 2nd. At one point, that was when the notice came up on PSJD. That could have been in 2021 or in 2020, because right now we're looking back 2 years through our data on PSJD. The idea is maybe they would be looking for one again this coming year, and they haven't gotten their notice updated yet. Or if you are a rising 3L, or sorry, a rising 2L, and you're thinking about, you know, the work that you're going to have as a rising 3L next summer, you can look at what kinds of organizations and what kinds of fellowships are popping up at what time during the calendar year, and start to map out a plan for, you know, who you need to be reaching out to and what you need to be thinking about as your 3L year unfolds. That is briefly an overview of what we're doing on PSJD with respect to fellowships, and hopefully how you can make the most of it. Thanks so much.
And we appreciate that so much. PSJD is such a great resource, and it continues to evolve to be so incredibly helpful. So that was fantastic. I want to thank our panelists as well. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Jen. There's another question about letters of recommendation. And so if folks are still here and want to talk about letters of recommendation. And then the last thing I will say is, if you want to ask your question directly, if you just want to raise your hand and I can give you the ability to talk with our panelists and you can ask questions directly, or if you don't want to do that, if you want to be shy, please put them in the Q&A. We have a couple more minutes until we can get to your burning questions, whether they are about the applications. One thing I just wanted to touch base on a little bit, if panelists don't mind sharing, is the interview piece and how important that is and what you really want to get across. So I don't want to steal time, but I do want to sort of explore interviews as well.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to read out this this other question that we got in the Q&A, which is, I'm wondering if it's advisable to have a letter of recommendation from someone at your host organization who's supervised you before, if in the event that you've worked there before. And I'm seeing that Kathleen already typed in an answer, but I'll read it out just for everyone's benefit. Kathleen says that for Skadden, the organization can absolutely write 2 letters. One would be the host commitment letter that's already a part of the application process, and then also a supervisory recommendation. Also, if you choose a different supervisor, the organization can always write about how great you are in their host letter. So thank you both for the question and the answer there. Is there anyone else who wants to either add onto that answer, or if anyone else, I see Jessica's come off mute, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump in. Absolutely, you can have someone from your host organization write a letter if you've worked there before, your supervisor or whomever. I think, again, just in the idea of being a little strategic about the space you have available, if they're going to reiterate the exact same skills, attributes, and stories that someone else is going to talk about, maybe choose someone else. But absolutely, it's an option. Just think about whether or not it fits the information you hope we have about you.
Any other questions? The people can either just come off mute and ask, or type them in the Q&A. And in the meantime, I know Christina had also said it might be helpful to explore a little bit about the interview itself. So I don't know if any of our panelists want to just share thoughts about the interview process and what that looks like, or what people should expect.
Absolutely, and I want to make sure I have time for Kathleen to talk as well, and Catherine, whoever else. So our interviews are generally half an hour, and we send out in advance a list of suggested or possible questions. So while they are not going to encompass every question, we do try to give you a good flavor for the questions we usually ask or see, so that you have an opportunity to review and think through some of your answers. I would say the big thing is to practice. See if your host organization, your career office, your professors, whomever, try to get a group and have them ask you some of those questions and really, really get comfortable with it. And then the last thing I would add is, we very typically start with a question of, would you describe, your interest in your project in a minute or two to open the interview. So I just highlight that and flag it because I think that it's a really great opportunity to highlight the things again that you really want us to know and to hear. So I think that's many times the most important answer that you give.
Great advice. Ours are also 30 minutes. I will tell you, I thought mine was 12 minutes long. It goes by really quick. And so preparation allows you to use your time well. So you're the expert in the room, which means that you can do that reflection and thinking in advance about what are the 3 or 5 things that you absolutely want to make sure whoever's interviewing you has taken away by the time you leave. So I also always try to start with an open-ended, how'd you pick your project? And I always try to end with, is there anything else you want to add? It's a lawyering skill to use your time well. The one thing I would just keep in mind is, of course, this is an important moment for you, and so that can feel scary. But I know that the sponsors and I know the advisory committee members and we believe in you. That's why we extended an interview to you. So there won't be a hostile audience. We're excited about you and your project. So the questions are going to be about you, about your resume, about your project, about your host, right? That you're going to be well prepared to answer all of them. And so come in with as much confidence and as few nerves as possible, because you really are well positioned to do well in the interview process. I would say we also just send a super brief video outlining everything so everyone knows what's coming in the interview.
Great, thank you. And I see one more question that just came in. How direct services does a project need to be? I'm interested in joining with an environmental law organization that represents their members and impacted communities, but it's more impact litigation than direct representation. Would this still qualify?
Okay, so this is one where funders are probably going to look at things differently. And, another funder who's not on the call is Justice Catalyst, who we think is very open to impact projects. I would say we bring a healthy skepticism to impact-only projects, which doesn't mean there won't be any in any given class. We're really thinking a lot about what is feasible in 2 years. And so being super cognizant about what that looks like in a 2-year fellowship is something you should think about with your host. And then for Skadden, we only fund poverty law. So Skadden fellowship projects have to be targeted at and accountable to poor communities. And there are super important issue areas, whether it's voting rights or environmental law, civil rights, civil liberties, which can be poverty law projects, but not the full scope of those topic areas would fall within our guidelines. Oh, and I'm always happy to talk to individual applicants about whether or not the project would fit in our guidelines.
So we have a little bit of a different perspective. So we have plenty of projects that have no direct representation. So we do, again, it's about, I've said unmet legal needs, and those legal needs might be voting rights, and enforcement or something like that. We always say that the project should be ambitious but feasible. So to touch on Kathleen's point of impact litigation, we do have folks, projects that are funded every year that propose impact litigation. But if you're going to do something like that, I think it's really important to consider the sustainability question of your project. Who's going to take that forward if it's not completed at the end of your fellowship? Is your host organization making a commitment to do that? Or, what is your strategy? Are you building a coalition? Like, how is that going to work and look going forward? So that would be the big question on that for us. But really, direct representation is just one strategy you can use in our process. And so I would encourage you to think creatively about how you want to meet the needs.
Thank you all for that fantastic bit of information. We could talk for 3 more hours and still maybe not cover everything. So let me just remind folks of a couple of things. One, EJW, Skadden, all the big funders have informational webinars, information on their websites, FAQs. You're not the first person to apply to their fellowship. You won't be the last, and you may or may not have a unique question. Having said that, I know from personal experience, Kathleen and Jessica will get on the phone with you and talk through a project. Does this make sense for what we look for in our funders, what we look for in our projects? Other programs are the same way. Funders want to fund, so they will do everything they can to help you figure out what makes sense. But the bottom line is they are looking for why you, why this project, why this host, and why now? And if you could answer those 4 questions with the passion that you are the only person that can move this forward, you have a great chance of being successful. Thank you so much for coming. I hope this has excited you about being a fellow. In the follow-up information, I will give you all of the great information about the programs, everything that Sam talked about with PSJD and its wonderful tool and their contact information so that you can follow up and you too can be counted as a fellow when we make those announcements next year. Thank you, panelists, for taking your time. I know you're very busy and it's important to have this discussion. Have a great night, everyone, and good luck on your applications.